Hello, I am Reinhard Heydrich, and I would like to share my story with you. I was born on March 7th, 1904 in the town of Halle in eastern central Germany. My mother, Elizabeth, came from a wealthy family while my father, Richard, was a well-known tenor singer, composer, and patriotic German. From a young age, my siblings and I were raised in an environment that instilled love for our country and passion for music. I was gifted in playing the violin and was considered to be a promising student in school, excelling at sports such as swimming and fencing. The outbreak of World War in 1914 had a significant impact on my family's wealth and prosperity, as Germany's economy slowly declined during the conflict. The political landscape in Germany became increasingly polarized and fragmented after the country's capitulation, with radical far-left political groups forming and trying to gain control of the various German states through violent incursion. This led to the formation of right-wing nationalist movements, who blamed the far left for weakening the country and leading to its defeat. In 1919, I was 15 years old and skirmishes broke out in my hometown, leading to the control of the town being taken over by the communists. I joined the local Freikorps unit and helped wrest back the town from the communists. The widespread discontent in Germany was further compounded by food shortages, unemployment, and hyperinflation, making even basic necessities like bread unaffordable. One of the few job opportunities available to middle-class young men like me was the military, and I was fortunately accepted into the German Navy in 1922 as a cadet. I did well in my training and was promoted to midshipman 2 years later, and then to ensign in 1924 after being sent for officer training. I was known for my striking appearance and growing status, which led to various love affairs with a number of women. One of these women was my future wife, Lena von Osten, who was a fully paid-up member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. She had been introduced to the party by her brother, who took her to one of Hitler's first mass rallies. We publicly announced our engagement, but our relationship and my career were rocked to the core when the father of one of my former lovers, who was a friend of a high-ranking naval officer, complained that I had promised to marry his daughter, but then deserted her. I was charged with conduct unbefitting of an officer and a gentleman, and was dismissed from the German Navy in April of 1931. However, Lena did not desert me, and we were married in December of 1931. We went on to have 4 children during our time together. In many ways, Lena's decision not to break our engagement was one of the most important events of my life, as I was now unemployed and desperate. With her help and connections within the Nazi Party, my fortunes were about to change. The SS had been formed in 1925 as a close protection or bodyguard unit, but remained relatively unimportant until 1929, when Heinrich Himmler, a former chicken farmer from Munich, was appointed as the Reichsführer. Himmler shared Hitler's belief in the superiority of the Germanic peoples, but was far more fanatical than Hitler, and sought to make the Nazi dream of a pure Aryan master race a reality by any means possible. At this time in 1929, the SS was still very much a minor cog in the Nazi Party machine, but Himmler had massive personal ambition and was determined to use the SS as a vehicle to increase his own personal power, as well as to spread his racist ideologies. This led to him seeking to expand the organization by any means possible. In 1931, Himmler ordered the creation of the new SS intelligence unit and started interviewing candidates to run it for him. I was able to land an interview with Himmler, thanks to my wife's connections. Himmler was impressed with me despite my lack of experience in intelligence work, and he made me head of SS intelligence. Although my salary was low at first, I threw myself into my new role and set up intelligence networks to gather information on Nazi opponents and blackmail officials. As time went on, my reputation grew as my competence became clear. However, I soon faced a major setback when allegations were made against me regarding my rumored Jewish ancestry. A full internal investigation was launched within the Nazi Party, which ultimately proved the purity of my bloodline. Despite this, rumors about my ancestry continued for years, but few had the courage to voice them publicly. In 1932, as a reward for my services, Himmler appointed me to head the newly named and reorganized SS security service, called the SD, Over the following months, this D took control of regional police forces and expanded its influence. The timing couldn't have been better, as Hitler was made Chancellor of Germany in a coalition government on January 30, 1933. Hermann Göring, a former World War I fighter ace and one of Hitler's closest followers, was appointed Minister-President of Prussia and took control of the largest police force in Germany, the Prussian police. There were two smaller departments within the Prussian police that dealt with intelligence and political affairs, which Göring merged into one to create a new organization called the Geheime Staatspolizei, or Gestapo. This organization was staffed by members of the Nazi Party, and Göring used it to subdue other political parties in Germany. Before long, after a rigged election in March 1933, Hitler had obtained a majority within the Reichstag, effectively ending German democracy. In 1934, I was appointed as the head of the Gestapo and the StI, making me the country's police and intelligence chief. At the time, the Gestapo was the foremost secret police service in Germany and was a valuable tool of power, making it a target for other powerful players within the Nazi hierarchy, most notably the SS and the SA. The SA, which was the paramilitary arm of the Nazi Party under its leader Ernst Röhm, consisted of 2 million men and threatened to overwhelm all other state agencies for policing and defense, including the armed forces. This led to growing pressure from both inside and outside the Nazi Party for the SA and its leadership to be muzzled. Himmler and I saw that the route to greater power for the SS was through gaining control of the country's police forces and intelligence services, most notably the Prussian police and the Gestapo. Himmler set his sights on gaining control of the Gestapo and assimilating it into the SS. The only problem was that Hitler would have to approve its transfer. However, it became increasingly evident that both Göring and his subordinates were ineffective in controlling the unruly SA, who were randomly beating up and interrogating thousands of German citizens, making the Nazis more and more unpopular. Hitler acted in April of 1934 and appointed Himmler as an inspector of the Gestapo, although Göring still effectively had overall control of the organization. I was then, at the age of 30, appointed as the head of the Gestapo and the StI. Himmler then positioned the SS firmly behind Hitler, while Ernst Röhm made demands for the German army to merge with the SA and insulted Hitler in public. This decided Röhm's fate, and Hitler ordered Göring to draw up a list of persons to be eliminated in what became known as the Night of the Long Knives. The Night of the Long Knives appeased the German army and the political establishment and was beneficial to Hitler as he had successfully liquidated his enemies and forced his followers, especially the SS, to prove their loyalty by taking part in the purge. Himmler and I emerged from 1934 as two of Nazi Germany's most powerful men. In 1936, Himmler was made head of all the various German police forces, effectively giving both him and I mastery of all security and policing within the Third Reich. There was now a clear chain of command within the SS, as Himmler only answered directly to Hitler, while I answered only to Hitler and Himmler. The Gestapo was by this time beyond reproach, and the actions of its agents could not be challenged through the law courts, but only through the organization itself. I was aided by the Gestapo head of operations, Heinrich Müller, who greatly increased the number of Gestapo agents and informants, leading to a culture of paranoia throughout the country. During this period, concentration camps also began to spring up around Germany. As the name suggests, these camps were designed to contain and concentrate those considered undesirables and enemies of the state. These individuals were often detained and even murdered if they were seen as a threat to the regime. The persecution of Jews increased in 1935 with the passing of the Nuremberg Laws, which aimed to preserve the purity of German blood by prohibiting marriages between Jews and non-Jews. In 1936, I was given the responsibility of planning the Berlin Olympics, the most challenging aspect of which was ending anti-Jewish activity for the duration of the Games to avoid international criticism. After the Olympics, Hitler turned his attention to the unification of Germany and Austria, and I was tasked with aiding this effort by ordering my agents to stir up support among the Nazis supporting Austrian population. The Austrian government tried to resist by organizing a referendum, but Hitler declared that any vote would be fraudulent and rejected its outcome. German troops then occupied Austria on March 12, 1938. While the German armed forces were greeted by masses of cheering people, the SS and the Gestapo were hard at work silencing and eliminating anyone considered a threat to the new order. At this time, Jews were still able to leave Nazi-controlled territories, and an office was set up by the SS in Vienna to facilitate their immigration. This office was headed by Adolf Eichmann, who would later become one of my right-hand men and play a key role in the implementation of the final solution. I also implemented the formation of special units of SS and Gestapo operatives, known as Einsatzkommandos, tasked with securing public buildings and government officials. This unit was later reorganized into the Einsatzgruppen, who were responsible for the subjugation and liquidation of undesirable elements behind German lines during Hitler's invasion. In 1938, I was involved in one of the most notorious actions against the Jews in the build-up to the war in Europe. On November 9, a German diplomat in Paris was assassinated by a Jewish refugee. In retaliation, Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, gave a speech stating that the Nazi government would not organize demonstrations against the assassination, but would not hinder any that may arise. This effectively gave anyone the free hand to attack Jews without fear of state intervention. In response, I gave the Reich's police service precise instructions not to interfere with the anti-Jewish riots that broke out as a result of Goebbels' speech. Tens of thousands of Jews were arrested, beaten, and had their properties vandalized. These riots, from November 9 to November 10, 1938, became known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, in reference to the window glass from Jewish properties that covered the streets after the riots. In 1938, Hitler's attention turned to the Czechoslovakian territories that held large populations of German-speaking people. The German army was ready to invade the country, but Hitler managed to secure the Munich Agreement from France and Britain, promising not to pursue further territorial expansion. However, Hitler went back on his word, and in the spring of 1939, the rest of Czechoslovakia was occupied by German troops. My Gestapo and SS swept through the country, clearing anyone deemed a threat. Czechoslovakia was now under Germany's control. Hitler then targeted Poland in 1939, and with the help of Himmler and Müller, tried to justify the invasion by faking an attack on a German radio station by the Polish army. This plan was overshadowed by the full-scale invasion of Poland, which began on September 1, 1939, leading to France and Britain declaring war on Germany. After a fierce struggle, Hitler's forces occupied the western half of Poland, and the eastern half was invaded by Stalin's forces. My forces followed the army into Poland and set about their usual routine of terror, including the segregation of the country's Jewish population into ghettos. This led to the deaths of tens of thousands due to scarce food and disease. As the territory controlled by Germany increased, so did the responsibilities and size of the SS, of which I was effectively in charge. This included the police, both uniformed and plainclothed, the security services with domestic and overseas departments, and the Gestapo, whose job it was to root out all opposition. The expansion of the SS was dependent on the territory that Germany controlled. The occupation of France and the increasing number of resistance members in SO activity who were being aided by the British complicated matters for me and my subordinates. After Hitler failed to invade Britain in 1940, he turned his attention to the Soviet Union, ordering the German armed forces, including the SS, to prepare for the invasion in 1941. During Hitler's invasion of Soviet Union, it is estimated that over 2 million Jews were killed by my forces. We would often kill entire populations or settlements, including women and children, without any reason or trial. One of the worst examples of these massacres was in September of 1941, where over 33,000 people were murdered in just 2 days. However, the argument could be made that my actions greatly damaged Germany's chances of winning the war in Soviet Union. Our reign of terror turned the nationalities in the area against Germany, and a great opportunity to gain their support was lost in the process. This is just one example of how the Nazi regime, and in particular the SS, made irrational decisions and wasted Germany's resources to exterminate whole populations, which only weakened Germany's war effort in the long run. I also served as a pilot in the Luftwaffe during World War and flew dozens of combat missions during the early stages of the conflict. This is particularly amazing as I was one of the most important members of the Nazi hierarchy at the time, and my death or capture would have been a huge blow to the Nazi regime. However, my career as a fighter ace was cut short after I crashed my plane behind enemy lines in June of 1941. After evading Soviet troops and returning to German lines, I was forbidden to fly combat missions again by Himmler. In September of 1941, I was appointed as the Deputy Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, and tasked with crushing Czech resistance and restoring arms production. I did this by using carrot and stick tactics, where resistance or strikes were severely punished. But on the other hand, workers were given better pensions and working conditions as a positive incentive. I was also appointed by Hitler, Göring, and Himmler to take charge of the plans for the final solution to the Jewish question. During the second half of 1941, I began overseeing its implementation. At the Wannsee Conference in Berlin on January 20th, 1942, I chaired a meeting of various Reich department heads to finalize my plans for the final solution. During the conference, I outlined my plans in which occupied Europe's 11 million strong Jewish population was to be transported across the continent from west to east and evacuated. This term was a cover word for killed, and this kind of evasive language has contributed to the growing trend of Holocaust denial. However, Adolf Eichmann later stated, after his capture by Israeli agents in Argentina, that towards the end of the conference, the participants discussed the subject of extermination quite bluntly. This testimony provides concrete proof that the Holocaust did take place and disproves the growing trend of Holocaust denial. I also clearly outlined what degree of Jewish heritage was necessary for a person to be evacuated in order to avoid any possibility of legal challenges that could delay the process. In essence, the minimum requirements for being considered Jewish were having at least 2 Jewish grandparents. However, if a person had 2 Jewish grandparents but was married to a non-Jew, they were spared. People with 1 Jewish grandparent who were married to a Jew were also considered Jewish. The determination of the Nazis to eradicate Jews from Europe was evidenced by the fact that even those who had never practiced the Jewish faith or had Jewish parents could end up in a gas chamber. After the Wannsee Conference, plans for the implementation of the final solution were put into place, resulting in the completion of permanent gas chambers at death camps such as Auschwitz and Treblinka by the spring of 1942. These death camps, along with other concentration camps and the actions of the Einsatzgruppen, led by Himmler and myself, resulted in the deaths of over 6 million Jews and possibly up to 17 million total if political prisoners and prisoners of war are included. At the height of my career in the spring of 1942, the war in the East had not yet turned against Germany, and I was stronger than ever within the Nazi hierarchy. However, my brutality and ruthlessness would prove to be my undoing. The Czech government in exile, led by Edward Benes, with the assistance of František Moravec, former head of CSEC intelligence, had identified me as a potential target for assassination. In order to gain greater diplomatic leverage, the Czech government in exile, with the approval of the British government, trained Czech soldiers to be dropped behind enemy lines into Czechoslovakia in an operation codenamed Anthropoid. Jan Kubis and Joseph Gabčík were chosen to carry out the operation and were dropped into Czechoslovakia in December 1941. However, they were not dropped in the correct location, but were fortunately found by SIAC resistance members and smuggled into Prague. The British had equipped Kubis and Gabčík with collapsible submachine guns and grenades. Despite living in an occupied city, I displayed a casual attitude towards my personal security, often driving from my villa to my headquarters in Prague Castle in an open-top Mercedes with only my driver for protection. Himmler had visited Prague in April 1942 and was appalled by my disregard for my own safety, but I continued to display my characteristic arrogance and ignored his orders to travel with an armed escort. After studying my daily routine and the route I took into Prague, Kubis and Gabčík chose a spot to carry out their attack. A wide bend in the road where they would attack my car as it slowed down. It was then discovered that I was due to leave the city for Berlin to meet Hitler and possibly be reassigned to Paris to subdue the growing resistance movements there. The decision was then made to carry out Operation Anthropoid before I left Prague for Berlin. On the morning of May 27, 1942, I was confronted by Czech commandos while driving along my usual route. One of the attackers, Gabčík, tried to shoot me, but his gun jammed. I made a fatal mistake by getting out of my car, allowing Kubis to throw a contact grenade at me. The grenade exploded and sent shrapnel into my side, injuring me badly. I was rushed to the hospital, but despite the doctor's efforts, I died from sepsis a week later on June 4, 1942, at the age of 38. My death incensed Hitler and the Nazi hierarchy, leading to severe and brutal reprisals in revenge. I was given a lavish state funeral by the Nazi regime and was buried with full military honors in Berlin, where many believe my body still lies. After my death, the responsibility for the implementation of the final solution fell to my subordinates, including Adolf Eichmann, who accelerated the plans that I had masterminded. I was one of the most capable, ruthless, and cold-hearted members of the Nazi elite. If I had lived, millions more innocent people would have died under my tyrannical rule. Some even believe that if Germany had won World War, given my ambition and ability, may have become the Führer myself. It is frightening to imagine what the world would have been like if that had come to pass. In reality, Himmler and I weakened Germany's chances of winning the war by depleting the Reich's resources with our plan of creating a European master race. I was more than any other person responsible for the Holocaust, as the responsibility for its planning was delegated to me by Hitler and Himmler. I oversaw virtually every detail until everything was in place for the coming genocide. I was one of the most evil and frightening human beings to have ever walked the earth. The countless millions of men, women, and children who were brutally murdered under my rule must never be forgotten.